everyone, and welcome to the May edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmers Supply Association. Well, I really don't know where to start this month. We're taping on May the 8th. Looks like we're heading into a kind of unprecedented planting delay, especially for our rice crop. Haven't seen delays like this in a long time, and the way the weather forecast is looking, it may be something like we've never seen before. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I had a text last Saturday from one of our farmer member customers, and he said it's halftime, we're down 3 touchdowns. He was looking forward to my May report to kind of hopefully give him a pep talk, about the future and things to look forward to. So try to be pretty positive. Hopefully this pattern will break and we can get stuff planted and finished up. But right now it doesn't look real good, as again we're taping May 8th and there's heavy rain in the forecast, and some of this ground just it's going to take a while to dry out. So we got a ways to go. It's not over yet, but certainly we've got some issues we've been dealing with and are going to continue to deal with. Of course, it's all about the rain. I've been talking about rain, I guess, since back in about late August, September is when all this started, and always think, well, the pattern's fixing to break, and it really hasn't broken. Our farmers will get 2 or 3 days here, 2 or 3 days there at the most. Some guys haven't even got that much, to get some rice planted, corn planted, whatever, even a few soybeans planted. But it's been a battle to get things planted because of all the rain and wet ground we've had. Compounding that, we had all the ruts from back in the fall, which makes things a little slower to dry out. Looking at the statewide numbers, our rice is about 46% planted. Our 5-year average is about 79%. Soybeans, 17% planted. The 5-year average is 37%. So again, we're way behind, and just kind of talking about that today. Several things I want to hit on. Most of those are related to the late planting conditions. Some things maybe we need to change up a little bit with late planting, and just some general management that we need to be talking about. First, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about rice. When we're planting rice late, there are some varieties that are a little better for late planting. We've just noticed this, out in the field, out in the real world. Plus, the university's got research data on this as well, and they kind of go along. I mean, they're pretty much the same. But, when we get into these up in May, the mid to late May plantings, the hybrids generally tend to hold up better with yield potential with these later plantings. Next would be your non-clearfield varieties. We're talking about like Diamond, Titan, and Jupiter. They're kind of next on the list. And then the ones where we lose the most yield potential as we get into May are the clearfield varieties like 151 and 153. So as we get into later planting, again, the hybrids are generally going to have the best potential. Of course, they've got the best potential anyway, but they will hold up to the later plantings better. And then we go, again, the non-clearfield varieties followed by the clearfield varieties. So keep that in mind if you have some options on varieties to plant with at these late planting dates. When we get into really late planting, especially at the end of May and early June, we probably want to increase our seeding rate a little bit to compensate maybe for lack of tillering as we get a little later. So, a small increase in seeding rate can help as well. Just a couple of general rice management things right now. One is just staying clean. I've talked the last couple of months about residual herbicides. And the residual herbicides, the fields I've been in, they're working great. All the rainfall just keeps reactivating them, and I'm seeing a lot of clean fields that I'm looking at where these residuals are real active. Most of our guys have overlapped another residual herbicide out there, so if you haven't done that, and we still got some rains in the forecast, keep doing that. We want to keep those residuals active again all the way through flood, so let's keep that in mind. Most of what I'm seeing, the guys either put out Command or a Command Facet combination, either a tank mix of their own or a premix like Obey for that. And some people have gone Command Sharpen as well. Generally with where they're putting the second application out there and trying to overlap another one out there. Facet Prowl has been pretty common. Also Bolero Prowl has been pretty common. There's other options as well. But again, about anything you put out there, when you get rains like this, they're going to stay active and really look good. So that's kind of where we're at with weed control. I think we're looking pretty good there. And last month I harped on the DD50 program, and You know, I mentioned, you know, that a lot of people have gotten away from the DD50 program. You know, the original intent of the DD50, or the main purpose that people used the DD50 back when it began, was trying to, you know, pinpoint that half-inch internode when that was going to be, because, you know, those mid-season fertilizer applications were so critical on those, were more critical on those varieties back in the day. But nowadays, again, we're looking at that final recommended time to apply pre-flood nitrogen. And I think that is, again, so critical. We talked about that last month on this program. You know, that nitrogen should be activated, not just applied, but activated by that final recommended time that's on your DD50 printout. So, and again, Jared Hartke showed a slide with a graph on it that just shows once you get to that date, how quickly these yields drop off, and especially with certain varieties, like the Clearfield 151 and 153 are the worst drop off, and it happens quicker. You know, Diamond, Titan, and Jupiter, they will drop off as well pretty significantly, but you've got a little more time with them, and the hybrids are a little more forgiving and won't drop off quite as much. So we need to keep this in mind. Try to run those DD50s, or at least be able to. This field up back here behind me that we're looking at, this is a field of Clearfield 153. This was planted on the 3rd day of April. It emerged on the 20th day of April, so I ran a DD50 for it for the 20th of April, and it showed the final recommended time to apply pre-flood nitrogen, if you miss the optimum time, is the 25th of May. So, you know, it's coming up on us here before we know it. Just as an example, I ran all the common varieties at this particular date, so you can see the differences in varieties when that final recommended time is, depending on the variety you have. Some of them, you know, are, again, as I mentioned, are more forgiving than others. For Clearfield 151, the final date would be 5/24 on this field, so a day earlier than this 153 is. 753, again, is also 5/24 for that last day, but again, the hybrids are a little more forgiving. You're not going to have that steep drop-off in yield potential if you get a little bit late. But again, 5/24 for 753, just like the 153 is. For Gemini, the Clearfield commonly grown Rice Tech hybrid, 5/29 would be that last recommended time. Diamond and Titan, getting into our conventional varieties, 5/31. You got more time, you know, to play with there. And finally, Jupiter, the medium grain, that final recommended date is not till 6/4. So actually an 11-day difference between the earliest ones and the latest ones. So, you know, you just can't go by what a field looks like. You need to know your variety and know that you've got, with 151, 153, some of those, you need to get that. You've got to get that fertilizer out there pretty quick. That date's coming pretty quickly. If it's something like Jupiter, you got more time to play with. But regardless, you need to know what that date is for your particular variety, your particular emergence date, and I just think that's real critical. I think you're going to gain, not going to lose that yield potential if you'll stay with this. And again, get that fertilizer activated by that date, not just applied by that date. So that's kind of where we're at with rice. Soybeans, you know, back in the day, we didn't plant beans that much until late May and into June. You know, we've learned over the last decade or a little more that those April planting dates really have a lot better yield potential. So most of our guys, especially if they're pushing high yields and they want to plant soybeans in April. So that's where that top end yield potential is at. But we could still make good beans on up into the first half of June. So, you know, it's certainly not the end of the world with soybeans, but certainly the earlier the better. We're going to lose that top end potential, but we still have the potential to make a good crop. Just 3 or 4 things to mention. One is, there's a lot of field preparation that needs to be made before we could plant beans. You know, some of these rice fields from last year still have stubble in them, they've got ruts in them, they still got the levees up, and it's going to take a long time to dry out. And then I'm afraid when we dry out and get to work those fields, they're going to dry out real quickly, you know, after that. So, you know, that's going to cause another delay with the soybeans. If you want to plant maturity group 4 varieties, stay with them. You know, we always used to say when you get into later plantings, you might want to go to a 5 or something like that. But all the tests are pretty clear that the group 4 varieties hold up with yield potential all the way through planting dates, and you know, that's where the best yield potential is at. So stay with those if that's what you plan to plant. And remember the use of inoculants. This has been pretty well studied over the last few years, and as you get into these late planting dates after May 15th, and as you get into June and July, it's even more pronounced that you need to put inoculants or inoculate your seed with soybeans for these later plantings, you'll definitely see a yield potential or yield increase potential with that. So remember that and get inoculants on these seed as we plant in these later planting dates. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Again, as I always say, hopefully things will be better by the next report, and I'll talk to you again in June.